Oral questions by members.
Member for Richmond North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On March 28th, I stood with leaders from BC's Asian community at the Stop Asian Hate rally in response to the horrifying shootings in Atlanta. Here in BC, anti-Asian hate crimes have risen by 350% in Burnaby and over 700% in Vancouver. Leaders from the community asked for the proclamation of Anti-Racism Education Day to prevent this from happening again. On April 6, Tuesday, I submitted the application to the Proclamations Office and sent a letter to the Attorney General. Since I've not heard from the Attorney General, I have started an online petition last Sunday, and in just over a week, over 6,000 people have signed in calling for this. My question is to the Premier on behalf of all the affected communities. Will the Premier proclaim May 29th as an annual Anti-Racism Education Day?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for this very important question. I don't think there's anybody in this House who doesn't recognize and who isn't alarmed by the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes in our province. And not just in our province, across North America. This is a topic of discussion internationally. I think it's incumbent on all parties to work together to fight hate in our province, all forms of hate, including anti-Asian racism. And I want to thank the member for her efforts to raise awareness around this important issue. In that spirit, I have written back to the member to respond to her letter, to thank her for her work on this issue, and to share with her details about work that government is doing on a week of recognition around anti-discrimination. There are many initiatives that our government has put in place to fight racism. I'm happy to go into detail. But what my letter says to the member, and what I'd encourage her to consider, is that we work together on this week to fight hate, including anti-Asian racism, because I think we're better together on this very important issue. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Richmond North Centre on supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the Minister's response, and thank you for suggesting that we should all work together. I have always been working together with this government from day one, and I wish this government can include me in a lot of consultation and idea sharing. I definitely would, the whole BC Liberal caucus would love to do that. But I haven't heard from the Minister whether this government is going to proclaim May 29 as an annual Anti-Racism Education Day. Anti-Asian hate crime has risen by 350% in Burnaby and over 700% in Vancouver, as I stated in my earlier question. So next month is Asian Heritage Month. Sadly, rather than celebrating the contribution of the Asian community in BC, we are forced to reflect on how discrimination exists in our society today. We need to do better, and it can start with action from this government today. The community who suggested the idea to me is now watching, and they are confident that the Premier and the Minister and this government are listening and are walking their talk. So my question once again to the Premier, will the Premier commit that this May 29 will be the first Anti-Asian Education Day?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. If the member hasn't received my letter, she will be receiving it imminently. And in the letter, I thank the member for bringing forward this request from the community for recognition on a particular day. And I share with the member information about a planned week of recognition that government has in the works. Our work clearly overlaps. There's an opportunity for recognition and for us to work together on this important issue of anti-Asian racism, as well as fighting other forms of hate in our province. And I look forward to working with the member on that. We've got a lot of work to do, and part of that is around raising awareness, and part of that is around taking action, as the member says. And to that end, I'm very proud of our government's work through the Parliamentary Secretary for Anti-Racism. where she has delivered a Resilience BC framework that is already supporting groups that are the target of hate. I note that the Richmond Women's Resource Center, when they were the target of Zoom bomb hate directed at them, that it was the Resilience BC spoke in Richmond that reached out to them to provide them with support. And so we need action, we need awareness, and I'm happy to work with the member on ensuring that appropriate recognition is made of anti-Asian racism and that we all fight it together. And I look forward to working with her.
Member for Kelowna West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier today, I spoke with Christina Lamb, whose parent lives at Grace Seniors Home. I also have received many other letters from the families of the 70 vulnerable seniors living at Grace's Seniors Home near Chinatown at the risk of being evicted in the middle of the pandemic. We've learned BC Housing is funding the operator that is taking over this site, but will only guarantee their housing, quote, until appropriate options are identified, end quote. Families are saying that if they are forced to move out, it will be, quote, an earlier death sentence, end quote. Will the Premier today guarantee that all the occupants of Grace's Seniors Home be allowed to stay permanently?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the important question. The federal government has a rapid response to homelessness initiative through which they directly fund nonprofit organizations to buy spaces where there are supposed to be spaces available for people who are currently homeless to move in quickly. Through that federal program, the Grace Manor site was purchased by a nonprofit organization. And I'm very grateful that it was purchased because it was at risk of being purchased not by a nonprofit organization, but in fact by investors, speculators, or developers. So it's now in nonprofit hands. But the member raises an important issue. The building is in fact full of Chinese seniors, and they're very reliant on the immediate community as well as each other for their health and well-being. And we are seeing a challenge around the conversion of, in particular, housing for Chinese seniors, especially older housing like this in the Chinatown area in Vancouver. I think we have a very elegant solution coming to provide support for those seniors and for their families who are clearly concerned, but also to recognize that the nonprofit who bought this space has a very significant number of urban Indigenous people who need to get off the street and get inside. So I thank the member for the question. I assure him it is front of mind for me. It is a very significant concern for our government, and we are working with CMHC and the nonprofit who purchased the building to find a solution, and I think the member will be very pleased given the nature of his question.
Member for Kelowna West on supplemental.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, for that response, and I like the option or the elegant option you mentioned. But, you know, the families that are in there, Minister, disagree. Frankly, they have been rattled by the letter that they received from Mr. Lee, who currently owns the building, and this was intended to be housing that fits a certain criteria by the City of Vancouver. The vast majority of the residents, their concern is they've been left in the dark about what's happening. And home workers are actually telling them that this is just a PR stunt by the government, so they should leave anyways. That's not what they want. These people are in culturally appropriate housing with the right care in Chinatown, and they're looking to stay where they're at. These evictions will destroy 1/5 of the culturally sensitive homes in the area. I have personally visited culturally sensitive homes like Grace and know how important and unique they are to the health and well-being of their seniors. So I would ask that the Premier intervene and prevent these seniors from losing access to their culturally sensitive care.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Any senior or family member of a Grace Manor senior who is being advised to move should not take that advice. We are working on a solution to this problem that will maintain the social supports and the community supports for these seniors. We recognize the sensitivity and vulnerability of this group. I'm very grateful to the time that BC Housing has put in to work with CMHC and the nonprofit operator to find a solution that will make everybody satisfied. And I think that we will have good news for the member. I advise him that this is not a PR stunt. This was a building that was for sale. Could have easily been purchased. And in fact, there was significant interest in the building from the private sector to purchase it. And I also accept very much that this was a very regrettable set of actions by the owner of the building, including advertising that he was looking for a warehouse to put these seniors into. And I hope that was just a translation error because the original ad was in Chinese language. But I am incredibly concerned about the actions of the owner of this building. Those seniors were not safe in their housing. It is now in nonprofit hands, and BC Housing is working on a solution to maintain those social connections that the member rightly recognizes are so important. And I look forward to having an update for him imminently. Thank you.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we hear about the Salish Sea, it's often in the context of the southern resident killer whale or the sockeye salmon. Both are iconic, both are endangered, and there is an overwhelming response in Saanich North and the islands when they're raised. Add the coastal Douglas fir to species that draw the attention of my constituents. A narrow strip of land circling the Salish Sea, including Greater Victoria and the Southern Gulf Islands, is known as the Coastal Douglas Fir Biogeoclimatic Zone. This zone is characterized by a unique geography, diversity of ecosystems that include unique wetlands, shorelines, and the Garry Oak Meadows. Over the last 4 years, my Islands Trust colleagues and I have heard from our constituents on the Southern Gulf Islands who want these sensitive ecosystems protected from clear cuts. Neither the Islands Trust nor the provincial government have the policy in place to stop clear cut logging from taking place in the area. It turns out the powers extended in the Local Government Act do not exist in the Islands Trust Act. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. Will the Minister amend the Islands Trust Act to allow local trust councils to implement and enforce bylaws to regulate tree cutting?
Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. It's an honor to rise in this House and receive my first question as the Minister of Municipal Affairs. And as those in this House know, I'm a passionate advocate for local governments, for families, and for the environment. And I appreciate this question very much because I know how much the member cares about this issue too. Mr. Speaker, the former government did not do enough to prioritize environmental protection, nor was enough done to ensure that communities had say in how their forests were managed. And this government is focused on making different choices to make sure that forests and biodiversity are there for generations to come. So, Mr. Speaker, I did have the opportunity to recently meet with the Islands Trust. I commended them for the excellent work that they're doing and heard them, listen to them to gain insight into their proposal. And we have committed to further discussions. So, Mr. Speaker, again, thank you to the member opposite for the question.
Member for Saanich North and Islands on supplemental.
Thank you to the Minister for the response. Clear-cut logging is having a dramatic effect on the landscape of the Southern Gulf Islands. It's having a detrimental impact on the environment and Gulf Island neighborhoods. Public information campaign is underway and Gulf Islanders have been demanding accountability from their elected officials, and they should. As the Coastal Douglas Fir Conservation Partnership website highlights, the CDF zone is, quote, home to the highest number of species and ecosystems at risk in BC, many of which are ranked globally as imperiled or critically imperiled, end quote. For more than a decade, the Conservation Partnership has included all levels of government, NGOs, landowners, and industry, and yet the clear cuts continue unregulated. At the Islands Trust Council meeting in September 2020, a motion was passed by Council requesting the province give the Trust the power to create the tree cutting bylaws like a municipal government has. They've asked for these powers through their council table. So again, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, every day we delay is another day that these endangered ecosystems are at risk. Will the minister commit today to urgently amend the Islands Trust Act as per the request of the council? And when can the council see to have the power to create tree cutting bylaws?
Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And again, I know just how much coastal communities care deeply about forests, about waters, about wildlife, about biodiversity. And Mr. Speaker, as a former marine biologist myself and a resident of a coastal community, I resonate and understand these concerns. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I really appreciated sitting down and talking with representatives from the Islands Trust about this issue. The member opposite knows how much I care about this, and I definitely invite him, my virtual office office door is open, and I'm happy to discuss this with him further. So, Mr. Speaker, again, I'm committed to continuing to work with my colleagues. This government is listening to communities, understanding their concerns, and we are here to work with them, and I welcome the opportunity to discuss this further. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Vancouver-Langara.
Mr. Speaker, the government has a responsibility to act to ensure that culturally sensitive care is maintained for the residents of the Grace Seniors Manor. Family member Tim Lam says, quote, "All of this comes at a time of heightened anti-Asian racism targeting our elders. Not only do they face outward violence on the streets, they also face systemic violence from institutions that continually forget and devalue their needs," end quote. I've heard from one elderly couple together for 80 years who have been told they will have to be split up to qualify for long-term care. Will the Premier intervene and guarantee that these seniors will not be separated?
Attorney General.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hate to ruin a question period. I know how much work goes into preparing these questions, and I don't pretend that this is a trivial issue. It's not. But I can tell the member that telling elderly seniors that they're at risk of being split up, when I have explicitly said now twice that government, I believe, has a solution that we'll be presenting imminently that allows seniors to maintain their social connections both within the building and in the broader community, is simply irresponsible. Now, I welcome questions from the members on all matters related to housing, but I think that Grace seniors have been through enough, and I'm very grateful to BC Housing, to CMHC, and to the nonprofit organization involved in working together to come up with a solution to support these seniors. This is not an outcome that anybody wanted, that seniors would be split up. And I do understand the emotion around the issue and why it would be a serious issue of concern for the opposition. But I can assure the member, and I'll assure all the members that are going to ask questions after this, if they continue on this theme, it is front of mind and we will address it.
Member for Vancouver-Langara on supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. BC Housing failed to communicate with the residents here. There has been a total failure of communication. Residents in that seniors' care home found out from the newspaper that they had to move. Advertising, looking for places to move the residents into the warehouses. This is the communication that was given to these residents. They're in their 80s and their 90s. The stress and the anxiety that this government has caused these residents is unforgivable. This government had the responsibility to ensure there was a proper, appropriate plan in place to ensure culturally sensitive care was maintained for these elderly residents. Let's hear from a family member again, quote, "BC Housing appears more concerned with managing a PR crisis rather than finding an adequate solution for families," end quote. Families say they have virtually had no communication from BC Housing. Culturally sensitive care is very hard to come by. 2- and 3-year wait lists to get culturally sensitive care. And there have been no guarantees it will remain under the Premier's plan for this housing. Will the Premier personally guarantee that these seniors will be allowed to permanently remain in their homes and keep their culturally sensitive care?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I mean, I don't want to let the facts get in the way of a great question, but here we go. The statement about moving seniors into warehouses was made by the actual owner of the building, and we have the federal government has taken ownership away from that person, and I think appropriately so. The member blames BC Housing for a lack of communication. This is a federal government program that purchased the building directly through a nonprofit organization. The member says that BC Housing is engaged in a PR campaign rather than taking actual action, despite the fact that now in 3, and this is the 4th question in a row, I have been very clear that BC Housing has been taking action, and we will be protecting those seniors. Those are the facts, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Peace River North.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The wages of all frontline workers in BC's community social services sector are funded directly by the province. But 17,000 workers continue to be discriminated against by this government for simply not belonging to a union. This is what Reach Child and Youth Development Society has to say, and I quote, "Your work should determine your salary, not your union status. If you're going to do the same work, you should receive the same pay." End quote. Will the Premier stop this discrimination?
Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction.
Well, I would like to first of all thank the member for showing an interest in this sector. Obviously, it's one that has been providing important services to British Columbians throughout the province. And as the member knows well, it's a very diverse sector, and there have been some historic issues that I'm proud to say our government has taken on head on. That includes issues around wages, recruitment, and retention. And I'm very pleased to say that the Social Service Sector Roundtable, which this government established, is a very good venue for these discussions to be discussed and for us to find a resolution that the previous government ignored. So thanks for the question. Work is being done in this sector, and I think that all parties at the table are confident that it will be successful.
Member for Peace River North on supplemental.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry to say that this minister isn't listening, nor is he working with this sector. The service agencies have had to file labor complaints. In the middle of a pandemic, the very people who are putting their health at risk are being discriminated against by this government. Community Support Care Society says, and I quote, "For more than 2 years, we've been fighting for equality for all our community service workers who are delivering an essential service. It is time for the government to listen and act," end quote. So my question again to the Premier or the Minister, will they end the discrimination?
Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction.
Thanks again to the member for his question. I appreciate it. And I'd like to just reiterate the importance of looking for long-term solutions to the historic inequalities that have existed in the sector, in this very diverse sector. And I think it's very important that government takes this issue on seriously, as it has, and will continue to do. The table is made up of members from the diverse sector that exists in this province, and issues are being discussed, and resolution is forthcoming. We have a number of ways of addressing this issue, and the fact that we're together at the table dealing with them, I think, is a good sign. So appreciate the question.
Member for Abbotsford South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On December 15th, 2017, we, the opposition, filed a Freedom of Information for a list of files. Finally, after over 3 years of delays, the government was ordered to produce the records. But in spite of that order, which was over 2 months ago, I might add, the records have still not been provided. The latest excuse is, quote, "Your request requires consultation, therefore, we are extending the legislated due date," end quote. To the Premier, who is it that's being consulted?
Minister of Citizen Services.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question. Our government is working really hard to ensure that our records are retained appropriately and that we're responding to all British Columbians and their requests in a timely manner. The volume of FOI requests has increased by more than 40% over the past 2 years. In fact, there has been a 250% increase from political parties alone, Honourable Speaker. Yeah. These requests have cost the BC taxpayers almost $43 million, and they take time. broad sweeping requests like this for records that haven't historically existed for government. They didn't exist under the previous member's government. They didn't exist under our government. We have had to create computer programs to actually generate those
Members,
programs.
let's listen to the answer, please.
Thank you, Speaker. We have actually had to generate computer program or create computer programs to generate those records. That takes time, Honourable Speaker, and that takes hard work from the public sector who is responsible for this. As the member has indicated, we have responded, and those records will be coming when they're ready.
Member for Abbotsford South on supplemental.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can understand why screenshots take so long to get, but this is a very familiar picture for the media, interest groups, and anyone trying to access information from this government. Endless and unexplained extensions, even for the most basic of requests, such as a screenshot. In this case, the request was over 3 years ago. The NDP was ordered to produce the records over 2 months ago, and yet we still have zip, not a single record, in spite of paying the $2,700 requested to the Premier or the Minister. Will they commit to actually meeting the current due date, or will this government yet once again find a reason to delay?
Minister of Citizens Services.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I want to let the member know that creating those programs to get those screenshots that didn't exist under their government, that don't exist under our government until now, until we've created these programs, that's 90 hours of work, Honourable Speaker, by our hardworking public servants. And the member talks about time, the time required. Under their government's watch, the response rate for FOI requests was 74% in 2015-2016. Our government has a response rate of 86%, and that is despite the 250% increase. Our public servants are working hard to fill these requests.
Listen to the answer, please. Minister,
Our
continue.
government is working hard to fill those requests, Honourable Speaker. In fact, last year alone, we released 1.86 million pages of documents. We are being open, we are being transparent, and we will continue to be. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Delta South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier's throne speech did have one laugh line, but it's no joke to the people still sitting in the largest traffic bottleneck in British Columbia. The NDP said the George Massey replacement would continue to be a priority, which is just so disrespectful to the thousands of motorists, truckers, and transit using still stuck in traffic. If the Premier hadn't been playing political games, a replacement crossing would be opening next year. Instead, the Premier ignored all the work already done, the hours of public consultation, endless engineering studies, countless stakeholder meetings, and a mountain of paperwork, and we're still at zero. Will the Premier commit that actual funding for the Massey replacement will be in the budget?
Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. And it's interesting. I had time to reflect upon previous throne speeches after listening to a lot of disparaging content from the opposition. And the one that catches my attention is the throne speech that was delivered in June 22nd, 2017 by a government desperate to cling on to power, about to test the confidence and fail in the House. And that speech, that clone speech, I think it's better known as, said this: recognizing concerns about the design, your government will listen and work collaboratively to move this project forward. Mr. Speaker, isn't it interesting that the opposition promised to try and cling to power, that they'd go back to the drawing board? They promised that they would start to work with and not against local governments on this project. Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we have done. We have worked with the mayors in the region to align their regional transportation priorities with the province's regional transportation priorities. That work is complete. We have also satisfied another additional condition for going forward, which is that we have worked on a different financing model. We utterly reject and continue to reject a toll-based, regionally discriminatory tax that is applied to commuters each and every day just because they live south of the Fraser. And we rejected that private model that the previous government proposed. No tolls, Mr. Speaker. The third element that we need, is successful federal partnership. And I am pleased to say that our government has the highest level of engagement possible. I am working with the Minister of Infrastructure. The Minister of Jobs and Economic Recovery is working with his counterparts. The Premier is engaged with the Prime Minister's office. This is a nationally significant trade corridor. It deserves investment from the federal government, just like bridges get in Ontario and Quebec. British Columbia deserves the same treatment, and that's what we're working toward.
The chair will allow one more question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So to the 85,000 commuters a day that use the George Massey Tunnel, I think moving forward, we will take that answer as a no. We're not going to see anything in the budget about the George Massey Tunnel ever being replaced. The only work done on the tunnel has been the addition of some new lighting, Mr. Speaker, which makes it easier, I guess, for commuters, seniors, and parents to see how long the traffic jams are when they're in the tunnel and observe the old gray, cracked, and decaying walls inside the tunnel. The Premier might say the Massey is a priority, but there's no mention of it, obviously, in the current budget coming up in a few hours, and there's still no decision on whether to go with the bridge or another concrete tube. So can the Premier confirm, at least to me, which option he's chosen for such a high-profile priority?
Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I will say this to the member. I am proud to be part of a government with the most ambitious capital program in the country. And I think the member will be very pleased this afternoon that our government is building on the most ambitious capital plan in the country that existed before the pandemic to build back better after the pandemic. The member should know that corridor improvements are already being contemplated and in the design phase and going to be underway on Highway 99 so that the existing tunnel flows better, that there is better traffic management there. And we are determined to work with the federal government to make sure that this nationally significant trade corridor receives federal dollars. His government, Mr. Speaker, would have charged moms and dads every weekend who take their kids to the museum or go to a soccer tournament or, heaven forbid, even go to work each and every day, thousands of dollars out of their pockets. We've promoted affordability in every way as a government. We reject that approach. We have worked with the region to get a consensus on the best approach. We have a business case that we have shared with the federal government to support an investment decision. I'm proud of the work that we're doing, and I'm proud of the results that our government has made in investing in infrastructure and creating jobs in British Columbia.
The balanced question period.